Hey, deserving listeners, this is chapter 14 in our deep dive on the Duggar family and the what one could call it a Christian cult called IBLP and all the other topics that are branching off from there, of which there are many. Let's get into it. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I am Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and this is my new shirt that some people call peach and others call salmon. Berto, who are you?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I grow hydroponic couch potatoes.
So this follow-up is to read comments on YouTube and also emails. I have curated a list of these emails and comments that are informative. It's not just a bunch of comments. It's not every comment or every email. I learned a lot, and I wanted to share what I learned from these people to you all. Okay, so the first comment from YouTube is from KWD. They say, "This is a great deep dive. Just one little correction. Although the parents claimed it was Josh who came forward," remember that, bro?
Yeah.
Although it was the parents that claimed that Josh came forward without being caught, presumably, that was actually a PR strategy.
Oh.
In actuality, one of the daughters woke up to him doing it. She punched him in the face. Then she told her parents. He referred to her later as a goody two-shoes and a tattletale after that. Berto, what do you think?
You know, it's weird. Why did we give the benefit of the doubt? Because they actually had mentioned, I don't remember which one of the many things I watched. They were talking about that incident where it's like, oh, you know, you didn't expect it from her because I guess maybe she was like quiet and mild-mannered, but she really socked him or something like that. Like they were talking about this. But I didn't connect the dots. I believed the hype. I was like, yeah, I guess it's good that he came forward.
Yeah, and I believe I remember saying this is their story, and we don't know.
Right.
But, and this is a comment on YouTube, so we
Yeah.
can't even necessarily know if that's accurate, but it's more likely that that's what happened. It's not typical for someone to come forward, unless there was some reason, right?
Yeah.
And we never heard of that. Like, he had something happen where he was like, oh crap, I'm going to get caught, or, you know, the pattern just doesn't really fit with that.
Yeah.
If he had done it once, then maybe, but he apparently had been doing it for months, if not years. So why then? Just randomly? Well, one of the victims, the sisters, maybe was old enough to actually stand up for herself.
Yeah.
This next email is from patron Patricia, I believe. So they say, regarding Josh's cheating, remember in 2015, I believe he was caught.
Ashley Madison.
Yeah, Ashley Madison. And then he came forward saying he had a pornography addiction, even though we don't know if it was a pornography addiction. He was cheating. Anyway, regarding Josh's cheating, Anna, his wife, was blamed by the Duggars and the church. She had gained quite a bit of weight after having her kids. When she was moved in with Jim Bob, I think after the infidelity came out and he was away at some Christian camp of some sort. When she moved in with Jim Bob, she started, and you know, God forbid a woman live by herself. You know?
Right. You don't want that.
When she was moved in with Jim Bob, she started exercising and dieting a lot to lose that weight, and she did lose the weight quickly. She's on camera saying that she got into shape for Josh so that she could welcome him home like a warrior who was battling sin while at the rehabilitation center, which, by the way, was run by a fundamentalist church in Illinois. Berto, what do you think?
You know, I feel like I mentioned, I didn't know that detail, but I feel like I said something, or I was thinking how basically they would probably think it's her fault. I was actually going a different route with it, though. I didn't know about the weight. I thought they were simply going to say, well, if she were providing for him as a wife, then, you know, he wouldn't have to do anything with this stuff.
Well, that's pretty close to that, and it could have been that, literally. And, yeah, again, this is a comment or an email. We don't really know, but it seems definitely possible, right?
Well, because it goes with the theme. The whole theme of the construct is guys are generally trying to do the right thing, but the devil is just so evil and tempts them so badly. And it's up to women. Women really are that last line of defense. And if they drop their guard, what are the guys going to do? Like, you know?
Yeah, and of course, to remind myself and maybe everyone else that is listening, that when you are born into this high control cult that is constantly telling you, regardless of gender, that you don't matter as children,
right?
Your only job is to serve the organization or the church or the religion.
The pyramid.
And then when something bad happens, you don't have access to, wait, is this my fault? Because there's already going to be a lot of self-blame anyway for people, even if you strip away culture in all likelihood.
Yeah.
But when you have that upbringing, then of course it's like, this must be, everything is related to sin, and there's always consequences for things. So any bad thing that happens to you, could be conceived of as like, I must not have been a good enough Christian.
Right.
And part of and I don't know if we heard this, but you could imagine part of women's duties, either implicitly or explicitly, is that, because they're supposed to have a lot of kids, so they can have a quiverful, right? Well, it's probably at least implicit that they have to be attractive to
absolutely
to their partners, right?
But that's a great point, because the whole idea is you got to cover up. But once you got your husband, you got to keep him interested, because, you got to have those kids. And, it's not up to the husband to be interested. Like, everything comes back to that. And, the other thing is, just even having been Catholic in Colombia, I was actually also familiar. I think everyone was familiar with this feeling of guilt. You always feel like if bad things happen, it's probably because you were sinning. We were little, me, my cousin Adriana, and my cousin Alejandro. We were all having fun at Adriana's house. We're jumping. I'm probably like 10, maybe 8. And we're jumping around, having a great time. And we're actually jumping off of my older cousin's bunk bed. Phone call comes in. And it turns out our mutual uncle, had been in a horrible car wreck because someone had drugged him at a bar, and he nearly died. And what we did, we started crying, and then we blamed ourselves. We were like, it's because we were breaking the rules. We were jumping off the bed. Oh my gosh. And we were seriously like we've done this to our uncle, But that mentality was not uncommon. Something we did caused the bad thing to happen.
Yeah. And I would say that that's pretty normal without that.
Even with kids. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And then you layer on because we started praying. We literally got on our knees. We started praying, I'm so sorry. We're so sorry.
Right. Yeah. Because for example, with divorce, I would work with kids who would blame themselves.
Yeah.
And hopefully there are people around, including the parents, would say, no, it is not your fault. But when you have this all-encompassing bubble that is surrounding you, telling you, it is.
It kind of is your fault.
It kind of is your fault. Going on here, Anna wrote in and said, your lovely rap, Kirk, about the Christian side hug.
Give me that Christian side.
That Christian LMAO. My high school teams were called the Rough Riders because our high school was Roosevelt, so the Roosevelt Rough Riders.
Okay.
So, do you know who the Rough Riders were?
Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Yeah. It was his army unit or something.
Yeah.
Back then they would have rich people or nobles or lords or whatever who would have their own crew of soldiers.
It's like Knights of the Round Table or something.
Right. There was still a remnant of that apparently during the Spanish-American War, which is what he fought in around the turn of
This is like the movie Tombstone. It's you got your little posse,
right? And then you just sign up as a group, and you are given uniforms.
Right.
And then I actually had looked up what Rough Rider could refer to, Urban Dictionary sort of thing. And do you know what it said?
Well, I imagine it was like, they were riding their horses and they were rough.
Can you imagine it relating to sex in some way?
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, like fairly aggressive butt sex or something.
Yeah. Well, it's more mundane than that. It is not wearing a condom, apparently.
Oh, I thought that was like, there's another term too.
There's a lot of terms.
Yeah.
Bareback.
That's what. Rough Rider.
Anyway.
So you looked up, what is Rough Riders?
But then I think someone else commented that their mascot is the Rough Riders. Patron Robin, she says, "Hi, Kirk. I was raised Mormon, And I found that it may have made me incredibly anxious about seeing nudity on TV and in movies, specifically when seeing it around other people. My self-esteem isn't great, and when my partner goes to the movies, I find myself Googling the movie he's seeing to screen it for nudity. I have this intense fear that if he sees another woman naked, he will realize he doesn't want to be with me anymore. And this causes me a ton of pain. I was wondering if you could dissect how Mormonism ties into this, possibly. How can I handle this fear both on my own and with my partner? Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, this reminds me of the flap. I mean, because...
Wait, a brief history.
Everyone knows the flap. Come on, we all know. So I'm a freshman year in college. My new girlfriend is going to a different college.
Your current wife.
Future wife.
Your current wife.
New girlfriend at the time. And we just really started dating. And I was visiting her floor. She lived in the dorms, and I was visiting her floor. And the door right across from her, they had a picture from Playgirl cut out on the door, but they had a strategically placed little flap, a little paper that you could lift. I thought it was hilarious until I realized, wait a minute. Did she lift the flap? Did you lift the flap?
Well, and back then you were a lot more insecure and a lot more jealous.
But, for some reason, this like Madonna thing kicked in. My mother kicked, like a lot of weird psychology kicked in for me to like deify, holidify this girl into like, well, she needs to be pure. She needs to be
your current
virginal.
wife back then.
Yeah. Again, we were just starting to date. So there was not even a semblance of a thought that we'd be married. So it was just like my new recently acquired girlfriend. And yet for some reason, something triggered in me. And I was like, no, this person needs to be super pure and pristine.
And you got angry at her, asking her.
I literally was like, did you lift the flap? It's like, did you order the code flap?
Yeah.
And she's like, God damn right I did.
Yeah.
But it was weird.
You can't handle the penis.
You can't handle the flap. But it was very weird because it was that same thing that's being described, which was a fear of like, if they see this other nudity, they'll be, well, in my case, a lot of it wasn't just seeing the other, it was seeing anything sexual. It was like, basically, they need to be pure. They need to be unsullied.
What does that mean exactly?
That's what I mean, okay, I know on the surface there were a couple things, because I had just recently broken up with my previous girlfriend because, in fact, I felt that I had sinned deeply and had betrayed my Catholic vows and all these things.
Oh, I didn't know that you were still thinking that like that.
Oh, I was super Catholic.
I mean, I knew that, but I didn't know you were that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I felt like I was going to hell. I felt horrible.
So it's possible that with your current wife, then girlfriend, you're thinking, in order for me to retain this attachment and, this shadow of the abandonment of my mother is hanging over me, and I need to not sin like that. I need to do the right thing, and I need us to not sin.
And I need someone like that. And if this person's going to be impure, then that must have been it. But of course, I wasn't going through all these things, in my head, literally. It was just a feeling. And then I think there was another layer to it, which was probably like having seen my father's behavior when I was a little kid, and there was a lot of controlling behaviors there. So I think I was modeling that as well. But why on her? Because she reminded me of my mom, probably. I don't know. Again, I never used to be like that. Then I was like that with her. And ironically, she was like the person I would have had to worry the least about in the world in that regard, like about cheating on me or something.
But I keep forgetting.
Just brought it out.
There's one question. I'm guessing I must have asked this before. Did she lift the flap?
Well, she might have, but
I'm
at the
joking.
time,
I'm pretty sure I've talked with her.
She probably didn't.
She barely remembers this.
Yeah, but she probably didn't, because she also, that's the other irony. She was, in fact, a pure little Catholic girl, too. Yeah. So she probably was like too scared to lift the damn flap. Yeah. I wish she had lifted the flap. But yeah, it was weird.
Yeah. So it could be both a purity thing of God will smite us if we're not pure, or an insecurity thing.
Insecurity, jealousy, impurity, everything.
Well, that
all
leads
of the
to
above.
her not wanting to be with me.
Controlling, and also controlling. Like, I need to control the situation.
Yeah. Well, we only, people say controlling, but it's really an offshoot of the previous two things. People don't control just because they want to.
No. In my case, it's I need to control because I don't want this mother to leave. Right.
Right.
So I'm going to impose boundaries so this mother doesn't leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do call her mother, like Mike Pence.
But again, what's so bizarre is we're talking about like, oh, this is your wife. But the context back then is like, imagine you just start dating someone. What isn't it fascinating that sometimes people's personalities and some imperceptible nuances trigger these super deep reactions and emotions in us before we're ever even half conscious about why?
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if a different set of ideas had been presented to you growing up?
Yeah.
Well, my response to you is the following, Robin. Number one is that in these groups, it is essentially told to you over and over and over and over again that all men are essentially compulsive rapists. If they see skin, they have no control over their behavior. And it's not their responsibility to fix that. It's women's responsibility to solve that problem by not showing skin or by saying Nike, Nike, Nike,
Nike,
that kind of thing. So that's brainwashing, and that's cult indoctrination. And for you to have a husband who you love to go to a movie theater that might involve, that sort of thing, then of course you believe that that'll unleash some sort of that compulsive rapist inside of him, because that's what you've been told. When I was taking notes on this, Berto, I wrote that down and I was like, well, that's probably going too far. But that's essentially what they were teaching, right? They were teaching that boys are compulsive rapists, because it's not just that they're attracted to you, but they won't be able to control themselves.
Well, even
if you say no.
Right. And it's even worse in a way, because you're calling it rape, and they might have, but actually what they would say, like, well, no, they're compulsive because they can't help it. They wouldn't even think of it as rape, even though it's literally rape, right? Yeah. And because it's still the woman's fault at that point.
Right.
They're just acting on the thing that you made them act on. Because
There's no talk about, well, if you dress like that, you might incur men's attraction to you. And then a girl, 12-year-old, raises her, well, but what if I don't want to do anything with him? And I say, no. They don't talk about that.
No.
Because if they answer that question without this premise, they would say, well, yeah, I mean, especially because they're not talking about random people. They're talking about their own, congregants, right? They're talking about
Bobby down the street.
Or Bobby sitting right there.
Yeah.
And so don't put Bobby in that situation. He's not going to be able to control him. And so that is, that's brainwashing. Yeah. So, and then, of course, the boys are brainwashed to believe that that's the case for them. The other thing that I don't know if you experienced this, Robin, but there's a notion in a lot of these organizations that there's a very slippery slope to evil. And if you look at something that is impure or wrong, it's just a matter of time before you're just sliding down that slope and you become addicted to porn and everything falls apart. So that would, of course, raise a lot of anxiety if he is going to a movie theater and he might see what could be considered, it's not called pornography, but it's pornographic, a naked person in an R-rated movie or something. Number 3 is you're taught, of course, that sexuality outside of marriage or procreation is totally against God. And a lot of bad things happen if you step outside of that. And so to have your husband experience some sort of sexual experience while he's away from you is, of course, with that brainwashing, terrorized. It's very scary.
Yeah.
Number 4 is that women are made to feel dirty for having curves, for having a body, right? It's this notion of your body is evil and men are, so you have to cover it up. It's disgusting. And men are going to want it, which is also evil, and you're evil by extension. You know what I mean? There's a lot of just shaming of just
all of the above, yeah.
Being a woman, especially like as you're developing as a teenager. But it also, Robin, sounds possibly like it's just good old preoccupied attachment, and you are worried about losing your attachment figure, and so you have a preoccupation with the anxiety about that. So, I don't know. All right, Berto, let's take a break. When we get back, more emails and comments. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So this next comment on YouTube is from Cutie Yoli. They say,
Cutie Yoli.
My parents also had the belief they couldn't be alone with the opposite sex after they became religious. I remember one time a female family friend called my father, frantically needing help. But my mom wasn't home, so he took 10-year-old me to chaperone. I was upset because I had a lot of homework, so I complained. He said, especially when a woman is as this distraught, we have to be extra careful. She might do anything in this state for comfort.
Ooh.
She might do anything in this state for comfort. You're here to protect against that.
Oh, it's weird because before that statement, I was about to like slightly defend this because I was thinking, actually, it's not a bad idea to not put yourself in compromising situations. Like, and I speak from firsthand experience, having put myself in too many dumb situations in my life. But I mean, like, if you think something might be awkward or sexually charged or something, and you want to just bring your kid along so nothing happens, like, I actually think that that's maybe wise. But then the statement is like, well, if women are in these hysterical moments, you don't know what could happen. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Never mind.
What is it, Bathsheba or something?
Yeah.
Wasn't that, didn't she tempt David or something?
Right. And it's like this assumption that basically, and this is almost kind of it's just the same theme. First of all, like, women are just going to tempt you. They're the ones offering you the apple, right? Like, let's just remember that that's the case. And plus, they're not rational actors, right? Especially in these moments, they just throw at yourself. Like, you don't know. What are you going to do? You got to,
Anonymous patron, she wrote in and said, I grew up with Jim Bob and the others. I was there when a small group of us went to IBLP as young teens. And I think, this is my own notes.
Yeah.
And basically, I think what she's saying is Jim Bob was one of them. So there's a group of teens that went to IBLP when it was just a fledgling cult.
I see. So this person's older, like they're Jim Bob's age. Yeah.
Right. I have since left the belief system, and Humberto, you're right. Ooh.
Oh.
It takes many years to figure out what is reality. And every once in a while, I still get triggered that everything that I think is true is actually, And every once in a while, I still get triggered that everything that I think is true is actually not true. It gave me heart palpitations when I first saw that you were going to be covering the Duggar saga.
Oh.
Chiming in here, I got a lot of that sort of thing. Yeah. I even talked in person with a few people that were telling me that once they saw that we were covering it, they were like, oh.
Close for comfort.
Yeah. And they had to talk with their therapist for a while and maybe not even listen to it because...
That's incredible.
Yeah, just because of how hard it was. One person even said, she was like, intellectually, I know that you and Berto would have a good take on the whole matter, but I couldn't risk if it wasn't.
Oh.
Because I love your podcast so much that I would be devastated if you said something like, well,
it's pretty healthy in the end. I mean, women are like that. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Also, because of her history and trauma of being betrayed in this way, she had an emotion or a trauma echo of, well, you can't depend on other people. They're going to betray you in this way. They're going to side with the cult over your feelings.
Yeah.
Intellectually, she's like really sure that that's not even, and she even talked to their therapist about this.
Oh, wow.
And whenever I hear this, I'm always like, well, of course the therapist is going to say, don't listen to that stupid podcast. Like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know why I always think that.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Well, that's a fascinating
Well,
thing.
because we're not super buttoned up and serious all the time. And I have
But
this.
it's not the kind of. Would you say that to you wouldn't say that to one of your clients. You might say something like, well, be aware of maybe what things you're listening to, what kind of inputs you're taking. Maybe I'm channeling my therapist, but it wouldn't have been like, you can't listen to Rush Limbaugh, or.
Well, at the very least, I wouldn't expect a therapist.
I just compared us to Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah. I wouldn't expect a therapist to say what this person told me, which was that the therapist said you can trust him or something like that. Like actually seemingly from her description, encouraging her, the client, to actually.
Yeah, that's a little surprising too. I would have expected a more neutral, nuanced take.
Yeah. And maybe it was more neutral, but it was definitely in the encouraging side of things.
But I could see it too. Like, well, listen, normally but Berto is on the podcast. So.
Yeah. So reading this sentence again, it gave me heart palpitations when I first saw that you were going to be covering the Duggar saga, and my therapist had already been gently pressing me that maybe I should unpack the influence of this stage of my life. It was hard for me to see the remaining holdover issues, but after listening to your 13-hour deep dive, just chiming in.
It's more than 13 hours.
It was 13 chapters.
Yeah, I know.
I see, after listening to all of the deep dive, I see much more clearly where I have some sorting still to do. So thank you both for that. Berto, what do you think?
That's great. I mean, again, I think, full disclosure, because I was in therapy for many years, I think listening to people talk about the things that I was trying to process would have been very helpful to me. Now, I know we don't cover every topic at all times, but since we have covered a lot of topics, I think for me, I would have found it valuable. So I think in this case, even if we were getting the wrong takes, because we often do, right? Well, you do. But even if we're getting the wrong takes, the discussion is still, as long as you can, make sure you're not being overly triggered and things, the discussion can help you think out loud yourself. At least that's how I experience when I listen to things on that I care about that might be related to my traumas or my issues. Is it still continues that conversation for me. So I see a value there.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that when you put it that way. And of course, that would make a lot of sense that overall, for people that are in the midst of a very important chapter of their therapy, that it would be something, like watching just a regular TV show might feel irrelevant given what you're going through. And to listen to a podcast that really goes into these things could validate, right? Because when you're in therapy, your therapist says you're not alone, you're normal, but you don't really know until you actually hear from other people.
As an example, if I had been, because I mentioned how when I started going, the main theme, it wasn't my mom, it wasn't this, the main theme was me not being present, aware of my present, my body, my issues right now, and things like that. And that was a big theme, and that never magically went away. It just kind of I worked on it, right? But I do imagine that if I had never even heard of that. Mm-hmm. I guess I had in the sense of meditation or things like that.
Yeah, it's not something that is talked about very much. No. And it's interesting that you had randomly a therapist that was like that. Right? Because most therapists are not that focused on the here and now like that therapist was.
And I don't know.
And as good at being able to hold that space of frustration for you, because she had to frustrate you by bringing you back to the present. And you were like, but why are you, you were like, well, I don't understand what's happening. And but to have that warmth or that differentiation, that calmness to just be like, yeah, I'm just asking,
Because I still had in my head, it wasn't, it wasn't like I was trying to outsmart her or anything, but I definitely in my head had the thing about well, I know what we're doing here. I get it. I get what we're doing here, but I don't understand why we're talking about this. Why does it matter what I was feeling 5 minutes ago?
And it's interesting to think about if you hadn't gone through that bout of therapy, what would have happened with your thyroid a couple years ago that you might not have paid attention or valued yourself? Or...
There's a lot of things in the last 10 years that, that's a good point. But what I was getting at was that if I had listened somehow, miraculously, to something at the time that would validate that, if I had listened to two dudes or gals talking and then someone says, I often I'm rooted in the past and I'm recounting these things, but then I missed these big things that were happening to me in the moment. Like, that would be really interesting, right? I'd be like, oh, that's what I'm going through. And then it helps me process. And maybe they have the wrong take about it. But then I told the therapist to shove it. But that still helps me think out loud.
Right. And I should say that a lot of people, which I did not really expect, were saying that they came out of a cult like this and they were brainwashed and now they're recovering. And even though that might have been a long time ago, it was very validating to hear us react in the way that we did.
Yeah.
Because we went thing by thing. We didn't just blanketly say, it's a cult, it's all stupid.
We went tangent by tangent.
We went point by point and really explored it and really expanded on them and said and looked at it. Let's look at this under a microscope and really evaluate it. Even though a lot of these folks would characterize themselves as no longer being brainwashed or in the cult, it lingers with you.
Oh, yeah.
There's always that nagging voice of just like, that you're impure, you're going to hell, or you're wrong, or whatever. Anyway, going on with the email here. So this person was with Jim Bob in
amazing. It was
early
in the middle.
Yeah, early IBLP.
Yeah.
According to the culture we were raised in, everything, and I mean everything, is spiritual, quote unquote. Nothing is just a present day thing. Nothing is actually exactly what it seems to be. It's all a big parable. It's all related somehow to the principles in the Bible. You just need to study to figure it out. And when you create such a wacky perspective, you are primed for a guru who can bring some kind of order to the chaos. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's very insightful. Number one, I can totally relate to this. That feeling, like, growing up, we studied the Bible in school because it was a Catholic school. Most schools in Colombia were Catholic. And you would study it, and it wasn't presented, of course, it wasn't presented like, well, and here's another book that was written, and here's some. No, it was presented as this meta reality, right? Like, yeah, you can learn your math, your spelling, but this is the real thing. This is what's happening. And it is true that then you were using that lens to like color everything in the world, every interaction. Now, you could look at that as a positive from some angles, right? You could say, well, okay, if the angle you're coloring everything through is like, how can I be a better person today? Mm-hmm. How can I do what Jesus did or whatever? Like, how can I help this lady cross the street? Well, that seems very positive. But then there's lenses and angles that start making everything, oh, there's demons after me everywhere. They're all trying to make me sin. Everything's a sin. And then it becomes really toxic.
Yeah. I thought that this section of the email was also really brilliant because it really encapsulates that experience. And it's not a dimension that I usually consider, which is for a lot of religious people, they don't consider everything to be, just through this single lens.
Right.
They might think of God as being everywhere or God as being not knowledgeable about everything, or God, like one example is that for people at one end of the spectrum, they would claim that the earth is 6,000 years old and that God in the Bible literally just made each animal and made human, it was just
as it's written, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And that all that is literal and everything is under God and everything happens for a reason. Whereas another Christian might say, and these are the sort of Christians I grew up with, which is that, well, yeah, God created the universe, but he also created
science and physics.
He created physics. He created the background physical reality.
And why couldn't it have created it? Right.
And he's not tinkering with every single atom of every single star in the universe. He made everything, and he also created the basis for evolution, maybe even knowing that humans would emerge or some sort of intelligent life would emerge. And then he also gave us free will, and he also gives us society and government and responsibility to take care of the environment. God isn't dictating every little thing that happens, right? You could say he knows that everything that's going to happen, and he basically is in control of everything, but it's up to us to figure out what we're going to do with this world and with the society and what we have. Whereas if you come at the other end of the spectrum, then it's like, well, why make a choice at all? Why work on climate change? If God wants the earth to get warmer, then that's just what's happening. You know what I mean? That way of thinking. Anyway.
Right. Oh, and by the way, I know that recently you did some things about Jordan Peterson, but this is one of the things that really broke me off from him several years ago, was that he looks at religion through this lens. It's almost the opposite. He looks at it, those, I remember, I have this memory of going to my dad's hospital where he was getting his PhD or whatever, and they had those two-way mirrors. And that's one of my favorite memories of seeing. But it's basically like this two-way mirror where Jordan Peterson can see the other side, but the other side only sees a mirror. And what he's trying to do is like, I'm afraid that by losing religion, they're going to realize this is a two-way mirror, and then there's stuff on this side. But that's going to be the dissolution of society, because in his mind, the world works better when everyone does have these lenses to look through everything, like this meta magic. And that when you don't, that's the dissolution of society, because then people say, well, then nothing matters. I could just kill whoever. There's morality is irrelevant, blah, blah, blah. And it's a big, cause of tension. But then, when you go to the extreme. There's a lot
of research on this.
Yeah.
All you got to do is just look at groups of people who are atheist, or societies that become more atheist, and compare. And you don't see anything like that. You don't see.
It's the same curves, right? The same distributions. But that's, and then taken to the extreme is what you're saying. Like, everything becomes a thing. Every moment.
Yeah.
I had those acquaintances, or I wouldn't call them friends, but they were acquaintances when I was growing up in Tacoma that were like that. They were. Everything, there's always these angels and demons battling constantly. Everything is a thing. And it's such, anxiety and fear and, stressful.
Yeah, very stressful. Everything, God's right there watching everything that you do.
Yeah.
And judging you. It'd be one thing if God was right there and going like, hey,
great job.
I created sex.
Yeah. Enjoy safely.
Enjoy sex.
Yeah.
I created emotion. Have emotions. I created free will and agency, and I'm also not so fond of oppression and sexism and racism, as stated. But I will, not as stated, but as
stated. That's true.
Well, as implicitly stated anyway. I mean, it's pretty clear that Jesus was all about anti-oppression.
Right.
Looked at in a certain
New Testament, definitely.
Look through a certain. Well, even the Old Testament, the oppression of Moses and his people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
selective.
But I'm just saying, like, through one lens, you could see the Bible as being just one long story of people being oppressed and then being able to persevere, and God rewarding them, for their pain and suffering, and punishing the oppressors.
Certainly the metaphor is getting out of complete barbarism into some sort of a civil society. Yes. And then yet what you're referring to is not only is God there not doing what you're saying, but the devil is there too. And they're both yelling at maximum voice into your ears.
Going on. I do want to point out that our parents' generation did not raise us with the full IBLP immersion. Jim Bob's parents were not that way with him as well. Meaning that for Jim Bob and Anonymous Patron's parents, they were... they as adults, they were not in IBLP as they were growing up.
And that seemed to be the case. Both him and the wife, they were not raised like that.
They entered maybe as teenagers. And so just going on. We were raised very strictly, no dancing, no public displays of affection, etc. But Jim Bob and Deanna, his sister, were not raised in the way Jim Bob and Michelle raised their own kids.
Yeah.
It was like our parents leaned fundamentalist fundies, if you will, and followed Gothard, but it hadn't yet learned all the ins and outs of all the rule system. So it's kind of interesting to think about that, like the generations that you have. Jim Bob's parents that were trying, but they hadn't been fully indoctrinated, and there's a lot of rules. When you teach the kids the rules from literally day one, think about all the rules that they know of and all the ins and outs. And then anyway, so the parents are learning this as like, 30-year-olds. The teenagers are learning it too. But I could also imagine that the Bill Gothard system and the IBLP system wasn't really as slick, right? And hadn't really...
it was just developing, that's true.
It wasn't as all-encompassing as it would become to families like Jim Bob's kids, where their entire school system, all of their friends, all of their family members, all of the parenting, everything that they do is within this fundamentalist system.
Yeah.
Listening to your deep dive, there were a few moments when I felt a little defensive from a sense of you othering. An example, yes, many people who took the homeschool route and spiritualized all academic learning ended up very cognitively deficient. However, several of us went on to thrive at places like Harvard and Stanford. Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure we did other. I definitely other regularly. I other for breakfast. But is there a but? Well, there is kind of a but for me. I don't mean to other the kids. It is a system that is unfortunate, because like the kids are born, they don't have any say in the matter, and then they just grow up and they're in that bucket. So I guess I was othering the system. The system is the thing I want to other.
Yeah. So did you see the John Oliver recent episode?
No.
It's a whole thing on homeschooling.
Oh, okay.
And it's pretty good from my estimation. I'm not an expert, but yeah. To be homeschooled, if someone told me that they were homeschooled, I would have no idea what that meant. It really runs the gamut. It could be something like IBLP. It could also be something where a parent is just neglecting their kid and saying they're homeschooling. But it can absolutely be a rigorous academic program, so much so one of the first episodes that I ever did, I mean, comparatively, it probably was 3 or 4 years into the podcast.
But it's a while ago.
But to us now, it was a long time ago in the beginning. And I did an episode with a fan of the podcast. I think we had 3 at the time. And she was...
30% of our fans.
She was from a homeschool environment.
Yeah.
And she came on the podcast to talk about homeschooling. And she was one of the most well-adjusted, smartest, wise kids I'd ever met. She knew all this stuff about psychology and about nonviolent communication. And, she was listening to our podcast,
right,
which was getting into technical, clinical kind of stuff. And it was interesting her. When I look at all the stats of our listeners, we have very, very few people that are younger than 18, which makes sense and almost probably is a good thing to some extent, because we get into some adult stuff. But anyway, so yeah, absolutely. There are plenty. Can you have a parent or set of parents who have a homeschool regimen that is sound, but they also tailor it? I mean, that was the thing about this kid. She was saying that she had this school system that was it was tailored to her, and she did what she wanted to do. That's what I remember her telling me, was that she would wake up in the morning, and because she had so much freedom, she actually really enjoyed learning. And so she just would grab the material and then tailor it to herself. If it was about biology, she's like, ooh, okay, what if we went to the zoo and I did this, or what, and she was like really involved. And she said there wasn't really any subject that she didn't like, because, when you throw all the kids into one system that teaches it kind of in one way, then some of the kids it's not going to be tailored to them. And plus, even for kids that want to go faster, they're held back. Kids that want to go slower, it makes sense. But if you're homeschooled well and in this style, you could see it being amazing. So yeah, when I hear homeschooling, so I hope we didn't just say all homeschool kids are idiots. Like,
I hope so, because I know homeschool people that are also fantastic.
Yeah.
Some of my best friends are homeschooled.
Stacy, my wife, was homeschooled for a bit.
Oh, geez, that explains everything.
But she did say, as I was telling her about what I was learning about ATI, and I was like, Stacy, you wouldn't, and we watched the documentary together, but I was like, Stacy, you wouldn't believe what's in this book. And she's like, I wonder if that's what I was homeschooled in.
Oh.
Because she remembers
some of that?
These super religious, ridiculous notions being interwoven within her her math homework. You know what I mean? Her parents aren't that way.
Oh my gosh.
So I don't know the whole story there, but I could imagine a situation in which her parents were just looking for a homeschool curriculum and they were just given a bad one and they didn't know any better, you know?
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I could go hours on my disdain for the educational system I grew up under and all the things I saw wrong with it and all the great things I learned in my home, learning by myself with slight help from my dad. Not much, because he was not good at the subjects I cared about. But that doesn't mean that I want to throw babies out with bathwaters.
Yeah, and if I remember right, the thesis of the John Oliver episode was that there's a lot of different experiences. There are people who actually benefit greatly, and we would absolutely get behind the homeschooling that they're doing because they were being bullied at school, and so the parents just like, oh, let's take you out, and the kid is now thriving, or a kid is able to tailor their learning environment, or they might live in a district where they teach abstinence only, and that, you know, what are the other ridiculous things that are happening in Florida? You know, those kinds of
where they ban books and you can't
prayer in
say
school,
certain words.
You can't talk about evolution or something, right? So, of course, if you're a responsible parent, and you have time, and you are into this sort of thing, you might consider doing homeschooling as a way to protect children from that influence and give them actual education.
I mean, we were doing homeschooling during the pandemic.
Yeah.
To some extent, to a pretty good extent. Like I was teaching stuff to my kids. I several subjects and things like that. My wife took a year off from being a teacher to like teach our kid, you know?
Right.
And it's like...
Right. So absolutely. And then on the other side, you have things like IBLP and also a lot of allegations of abuse where the parents are wanting to generally abuse the child and control the child. And so if the child is at home, then they can really go after that kid. Other accounts of people where the curriculum is basically just doing a lot of chores, where the one person on the John Oliver show was that they were showing the schedule. And at the beginning, it was like, here's math and here's PE, you know, physical education, which basically meant we just walked around the block a couple times. Okay. And then look at the rest of this day.
Paint the fence.
Yeah.
Shine the floor.
It was like 30 different chores that they were doing.
They were learning karate.
Yeah. And so that is, you know, it varies. But the John Oliver thesis was that it needs more regulation. There needs to be more oversight because there's so many kids that are being abused and harmed and uneducated or miseducated because of this notion that somehow parents have the full right to be able to do whatever they want, because that's kind of the way it is right now, depending on the jurisdiction, where it's just like, well, we don't want to interfere with parents' rights. Well, what if they're teaching this? Yeah. And the advocacy organizations are just like, hey, let them do what they want to do. It's not the government's role to get involved with that.
I find it really odd that leading up to the moment of birth, there is this huge emphasis on the rights of the baby, of the fetus, of the baby, right? Like, it's important. It's alive. We gotta, you know, the mother is irrelevant. All that matters is the baby. But as soon as the baby's born, the baby is now irrelevant. You don't need subsidies. You don't need food for stamps for the school. You definitely don't need any welfare. You don't need anything. And parents control the shots no matter what they're teaching or doing to the kid.
Yeah. Going off the email. A couple of things that I am continuing to turn over in my head after listening to your deep dive is that the attachment bonds in these families are not typical of today's culture. Let me explain. The parents focus on shoulds rather than love. If you, as a parent, do your job to shape your child's choices, then the children will turn out, quote unquote, right. And this is another point by this person, this anonymous patron, that is said in a way where it's like, yeah, that is different. It's a different culture. It's a different way. It's so interesting that you could have parents that literally see the job of parenting to be so paradigmatically different than the way that we see parenting, right? Because we see parenting as creating happy kids and kids that are thriving, kids that as adults find meaning and purpose in whatever it is. And, you know, of course, even people in our camp will be controlling or have certain ideas about how that's going to look and maybe emphasize materialism or something. You know, there's a whole other set of kind of things. But that for people in this high control group, they see parenting as it's your job as parents to make your kids follow the rules. That's the only goal.
Another irony, because a lot of times I think of these kinds of groups that would advocate these things as, professing freedom and like, I'm a free person. This is why I'm carrying my AK-47, my AR-15s, whatever, because I'm free and you can't tread on me and all these things. But the irony is that, but we must all conform and be a unit and not have individuality. And you must just follow these very strict rules. It is incredible. So yeah, the goal of those systems is the system, not the child. It's the system. You need to have more kids in this system, in this triangle, and go forward with the triangle getting bigger and bigger, because that's the goal. Instead of like, well, the other philosophy, which would be, we think if we build up little well-functioning, autonomous, independent, empathetic beings, they can go and work as a network to make the world a better place. It's just two different, diametrically opposed philosophies.
Right, and just think about how it's so infused in every interaction that you're having with your kids.
Yeah.
And how different you would feel about yourself as a human being.
Right.
Being raised within that constant, all-encompassing mindset from people that you're not here to be happy. You're not here to have a life. You're here to serve God and to follow the rules. And that's the only reason why you're here. And part of that is that once you're in my shoes, you will be making your kids follow the rules and the authority of this cult. And that's that you're an automaton.
Yeah,
that's
you
all
don't
you
have
are.
freedom.
You don't matter. Anyway, so let's take another break. But for the rest of this episode, it's just going to be for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to listen to the rest of this, as with all the other chapters in full, you have to become a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com. Why should they become a patron of the podcast, Berto?
Because when you're a patron, we let you in on a few secrets, things we've never divulged anywhere, nor will we ever, even to patrons. Oh, wait. And also, we can't make all this content without our patrons. Mm-hmm. We make all this content because of our patrons. Patrons requested this, this is for our patrons. And we go long, man. We go like in depth and all these things. And so, you get to decide what you want to hear us blab about for a long time. And the more you're a patron, the more we blab. So
that's right. That's right. The reason why we're doing this is because we took a poll a couple months back and asked all the patrons, and they voted. And this was by far the number one. Pretty soon, we're going to have to take another poll and find out.
You patron, we blab.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. Why should they take care of themselves?
Because they deserve it.